June 1945. A gravel pit outside Braunschweig, Germany. A 16-year-old boy named Heinz Petry stands bound to a wooden stake, hands tied behind his back, a blindfold over his eyes. 12 American military policemen level their rifles at his chest. A few yards away, 17-year-old Josef Schöner waits his turn. Both boys are wearing ordinary civilian clothes. Neither is in a military uniform. Neither has a rank. They look like any other German teenagers trying to survive a collapsing world. In 60 seconds, both of them will be dead, executed by American soldiers following lawful orders. Shot for espionage, shot for being children that the wrong system got to first. Before we go any further, subscribe to History of Army right now and hit that bell. Because what you're about to hear is the part of World War II that makes everyone uncomfortable. The part where Allied soldiers lined up teenagers in front of firing squads and pulled the trigger. If you believe history deserves to be told raw and unfiltered, this channel is where you belong. Don't leave before the end, because the twist this story takes will genuinely disturb you. Now let's go back to the beginning, because you cannot understand why 16-year-olds were being shot as spies without first understanding the machine that turned them into weapons. The factory that built child soldiers. The Hitler Youth was not some misguided version of summer camp. It was a state-operated production line for fanatical fighters, running years before the first shot of World War II was ever fired. When Hitler seized power in 1933, the Hitler Youth had roughly 50,000 members. By the end of that same year, it had 2 million. That explosion didn't happen by accident. The regime simply outlawed every alternative. Boy Scouts, banned. Church youth groups, disbanded. Communist youth clubs, crushed, their leaders arrested. If you were a German boy between 10 and 18, your only option was to join or become a social outcast in your own neighborhood. Picture yourself as a 13-year-old in 1936. Your friends wear sharp uniforms, go camping on weekends, fire real rifles, march in formations that make crowds cheer. It doesn't look like brainwashing. It looks like belonging. It looks like the greatest adventure of your young life. What you can't see is what's happening underneath. School books rewritten to teach racial hatred as if it were mathematics. Songs that glorify dying for the Führer. Ideology drilled into you daily until it stops feeling like opinion and starts feeling like oxygen. By 1938, over 1.5 million Hitler Youth boys had received formal weapons training. Tens of thousands had earned marksmanship medals. Some were barely 10 years old. The weapon was being forged, quietly, systematically, long before anyone outside Germany understood what it was being sharpened for. From training grounds to killing fields, when Germany invaded Poland in September 1939 and the world went to war, Hitler Youth boys started in support roles. Messengers, civil defense helpers, air raid assistants. But war consumes men faster than any country can replace them. By 1942, defense-strengthening camps were running full military training for 16 to 18-year-olds. Machine guns, hand grenades, our pistols, combat tactics. These weren't hobby programs. They were pipeline facilities feeding teenagers directly toward the front lines. Then Stalingrad hit in 1943 and shattered everything. Over 300,000 German soldiers were killed or captured. The Eastern Front was hemorrhaging. Nazi leadership stared at the casualty lists and then stared at an entire generation of boys who had been raised from childhood to worship Hitler, trained to handle weapons, and indoctrinated to believe that death for Germany was glorious. The decision was made: use them. In June 1943, the 12th SS Panzer Division Hitlerjugend was formed. 20,000 soldiers, almost all born in 1926. Most of them 16 or 17 years old when the division activated. Experienced Eastern Front officers commanded them. Children filled the ranks. They were handed tanks, anti-tank weapons, wash-in machine guns, and told they would save the Reich. Teenage killers in Normandy. On June 7, 1944, one day after D-Day, this division slammed into Canadian and British forces, pushing inland from the Normandy beaches. Allied tank commanders later described watching these boys attack like young wolves. No hesitation, no fear, pure savage aggression. They were brutally effective. But what they did off the battlefield is what the history books struggle to explain. Between June 7th and June 17, 1944, at least 156 Canadian prisoners of war were murdered by the 12th SS Panzer Division. These were soldiers who had surrendered legally, followed the rules of war, and expected to be held as POWs. Instead, they were shot in the back of the head, bayoneted, run over by vehicles. Evidence showed the killings were encouraged, and not accidental. Officers instructed their troops to treat the enemy as subhuman and skip the inconvenience of taking prisoners. After the war, Division Commander Kurt Meyer was convicted of responsibility for these atrocities, sentenced to death, and then had his sentence reduced to life imprisonment, then released entirely in 1954. Less than 10 years for the murders of 156 men. Keep that number in your head. We'll come back to it. When Germany started devouring its own children. By late 1944, the Reich was a burning house. The Western Allies had broken out of Normandy. The Soviets were driving hard from the east. German cities were being reduced to rubble. October 1944, the Volkssturm is created, a militia drafting every German male aged 16 to 60. In practice, even that desperate lower limit collapsed almost immediately. Boys as young as 12 were yanked from classrooms and handed rifles. 10-year-olds were taught to fire Panzerfaust anti-tank rockets, in some cases physically lifted to reach the trigger. One 15-year-old from Leipzig described getting half a day of Panzerfaust training, being shoved into an SS uniform that didn't fit, and shipped to the front with no combat experience and no real chance of surviving his first engagement. The choices these boys faced were not choices. Fight and very likely die. Run home and be shot for desertion by your own side. Multiple documented cases exist of Hitler Youth boys executed by SS firing squads for trying to escape a war that was already decided. A witness in Berlin, April 1945, described watching a boy, she guessed no older than 14, shot in the street by SS troops for abandoning his post. He had done the only sane thing available to him. They killed him for it. The Nazi state had made childhood itself a death trap. The Werewolf Program. As Germany's military collapse accelerated, the regime launched one final operation designed to reach behind Allied lines. They called it Werewolf. It was a network of trained saboteurs and intelligence operatives, many of them Hitler Youth members, who would continue operating in civilian clothes after Germany's defeat. Their mission? Gather intelligence, sabotage Allied infrastructure, assassinate occupation officials. Their cover? Just innocent kids wandering through the rubble. Allied intelligence didn't need long to figure it out. Captured documents and prisoner interrogations revealed the program's existence. Officers received warnings. Some of the teenagers wandering around in civilian clothes behind Allied lines were not lost civilians. They were trained operatives. Under the laws of war as they stood in 1945, any combatant conducting espionage out of uniform, regardless of age, could be tried by military tribunal and executed. The Geneva Convention set 15 as the minimum age for participation in armed conflict. If you were 16 or 17, international law considered you a full combatant, and combatants caught spying out of uniform could be shot. 2 boys, 1 foxhole. No Way Out, that is the world Heinz Petry and Josef Schöner fell into. Found hiding in a foxhole behind American lines, both accused of monitoring U.S. troop movements in civilian clothing, both connected to the Hitler Youth. They were tried before a U.S. General Military Court at Mönchengladbach. Charged with espionage, convicted, sentenced to death. Germany surrendered May 8, 1945. The war in Europe was officially over. These boys were still executed in June. Photographs from that gravel pit exist. They are difficult to look at. Petry, still and small against that wooden stake, the line of rifles. The moment the shots land, a cloud of dust, the body going slack, still tied upright to the post. Minutes later, Schöner took his place and the rifles fired again. Were they real werewolf operatives on an active mission? Or 2 frightened teenagers who had gotten separated from their unit and were hiding until someone told them what to do? The record does not give a clean answer. The trials were fast, the evidence incomplete, the defense minimal. What is certain is that the law permitted their execution, so the execution happened. The imbalance that should haunt us now, step back and look at what justice produced. Kurt Meyer ordered or permitted the murder of at least 156 Canadian POWs. He served less than 10 years in prison and died a free man. Heinz Petry and Josef Schöner, who commanded nobody, ordered nothing, were shot a month after Germany surrendered. Their full story never properly investigated. Meanwhile, thousands of Hitler Youth veterans who had actively participated in atrocities were never charged at all, because post-war courts had no legal framework for prosecuting children for war crimes. Many of those men lived long, ordinary lives. Some became teachers, civil servants, grandfathers. Most never spoke publicly about what they had done. When one 16-year-old participates in a massacre and lives to 80, another 16-year-old is found hiding in a hole and faces a firing squad. That disparity is not justice. It is the collision of law, timing, and pure chance, the machinery that war substitutes for fairness. What this story is really about today: international law classifies anyone under 18 serving in armed conflict as a child soldier, full stop. A victim requiring rehabilitation, not a combatant eligible for execution. What the Nazi regime did to an entire generation of German boys would now be prosecuted as a crime against humanity. Back in 1945, none of those protections existed. 16 was old enough to die in a gravel pit. An estimated 300,000 German youth served in combat roles in the final phase of the war. Thousands died in battle. Hundreds were shot by their own side for deserting. Some were executed by the Allies. The rest carried it, the guilt, the trauma, the silence, for the rest of their lives. They were all swallowed by the same machine, a system that valued an ideology over every child it consumed. The boys who fired Panzerfausts in burning Berlin, the teenagers who murdered Canadian POWs in Normandy, the two frightened kids tied to posts in a German gravel pit, all of them victims of adults who should have protected them, but chose instead to spend them like ammunition. That is why captured German child soldiers were shot. Not because they were monsters, because a monstrous system built them, aimed them, and left them exposed. And war has never been good at telling the difference between a weapon and a child. If this video made you think and genuinely uncomfortable, subscribe to History of Army right now. Hit the notification bell so you never miss when we pull another buried story out of the dark. Share this with someone who needs to hear it, and drop a comment below. In a world where child soldiers still exist today, what does real justice look like for them and for the people they harmed?